The hum of the engines was a steady, vibrating lullaby through the walls of the jet bridge. The smell of jet fuel mixed with a faint tang of disinfectant as boarding group 1 filed onto Flight 815, JFK, to San Francisco, a flight meant for executives, for those who measured time in meetings and millions. Dr. Serafina James adjusted the strap of her sleek leather carry-on, her platinum watch catching the fluorescent light. To the gate agent, she had been just another first-class passenger with priority boarding. To the world, she was the 38-year-old CEO of Aura Innovations, a biotech juggernaut about to finalize a merger worth billions. But to the two strangers who had just stolen her seat, she was something else entirely. An error. The hush of the first-class cabin was immediate, polished with accents. Champagne glasses already perched on side tables. The faint clink of ice cubes stirred by early arrivals. For frequent flyers, it was a sanctuary. For Serafina, it was a cocoon, a 6-hour window to recalibrate before a boardroom battle that could redefine global medicine. She rounded the corner, her boarding pass still in hand, and froze. Seat 1A, her seat, was occupied. A woman with honey blonde hair, sculpted waves lacquered into place, lounged against a window as though she owned the cabin. Her tennis bracelet glittered under the recessed LED lighting, her manicured fingers adjusting the angle of the shade. Beside her, in seat 1B, sat a portly man with a ruddy, sun-weathered face, thumbing through a glossy magazine with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the world bent to his schedule. Serafina's gaze locked on the placard above the row. 1A, window. 1B, aisle. There was no mistake. The boarding pass in her hand was stamped 1A. Her cocoon, her sanctuary, her seat. A flicker of exhaustion crossed her features, a weary familiarity. This wasn't new. She had faced versions of the scene in boardrooms, at gala dinners, in lobbies where the receptionist's eyes slid past her toward an older white man in a suit. But here, 35,000 feet of air and the weight of a billion-dollar deal loomed over her. She inhaled once, slowly, pressing calm into her bloodstream. She stepped forward, standing quietly in the aisle. The man in 1B finally looked up. His eyes skimmed over her, dismissive. "Can we help you?" His tone dripped condescension, as if she were an intruder in a gated neighborhood. "Yes," Serafina said evenly, her voice carrying quiet authority. She lifted her boarding pass, so the bold letters caught the light. "You're in my seat." The woman at the window turned. Her smile was saccharine, her tone a blade wrapped in velvet. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice stretching the word into a parody of sweetness. "This is first class." The single word, honey, landed like a slap, though Serafina's expression didn't flicker. She held the woman's gaze, then tapped the seat number above her head. "Yes, first class. Seat 1A. Mine." The woman's diamonds sparkled as she waved a dismissive hand. "There must be a mistake. My husband and I always sit in the first row. Perhaps you should check with the flight attendant. These things happen, dear." The man smirked, puffing out his chest. "Economy's further back. I'm sure someone can help you find your spot." Serafina stood her ground, her boarding pass steady in her hand. Her voice didn't rise, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "There's no mistake. I paid for the seat. I will be sitting in it." Passengers filing down the aisle began to notice. A young man in 2C angled his phone ever so slightly, the faint red glow of his recording app catching in the dim light. A businessman in 3A lowered his Wall Street Journal, his eyes narrowing as if he recognized her. The aisle was clogging, impatience building behind her. A flight attendant approached. Brenda, mid-40s, uniform pressed sharp, smile straining against the tension. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes," Serafina said simply, without heat. "These passengers are in my seat." The blonde woman laughed lightly, a sound engineered to disarm but sharpened by contempt. "No problem at all. This young lady is just a bit confused. We're in 1A and 1B. She must have misread her ticket." Brenda reached for the boarding pass. Serafina handed it over without hesitation. The attendant's eyes flicked from ticket to placard, her smile faltering. "It does say 1A, she confirmed, turning to the couple. "May I see your boarding passes, please?" The husband sighed, flipping his magazine closed with theatrical annoyance. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am?" He fished his passes from his jacket pocket and thrust them at her. Brenda read them. Her posture stiffened. She turned to the couple, her voice firmer. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, your assigned seats are 4B and 4C. These are in the first-class cabin, yes, but they are not row 1. You'll need to move." Silence pressed over the cabin. The truth was unambiguous. But Caroline Miller's face hardened, the mask of civility cracking to reveal raw entitlement. "Absolutely not. We specifically requested row 1. Clearly, there's been a clerical error. We're not moving. She can sit in row 4. It's still first class." She gestured dismissively toward Serafina, without even meeting her eyes. Brenda hesitated, a flash of desperation in her gaze. She leaned toward Serafina, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, I understand, but if you consider seat 4B, it would help us get everyone seated on time. I can offer a complimentary champagne bottle for the inconvenience." The cabin air thickened. Passengers shifted, sensing the pressure. A delay was brewing. Serafina inhaled, then met Brenda's eyes. Her voice was calm, resolute, and final. "Brenda, I am not inconvenienced. I am the rightful holder of seat 1A. The inconvenience is being caused by passengers sitting in seats that do not belong to them. I will sit in the seat I paid for." Her words weren't loud, but they carried through the cabin like the quiet click of a loaded chamber. The path of least resistance had closed. Brenda's shoulders sagged. The Millers bristled. Phones discreetly tilted toward the confrontation. The hum of the engines outside pressed against the windows, a reminder of time ticking away. And then the sound that changed everything. The cockpit door clicked open. From the galley stepped Captain Robert Patterson, salt and pepper hair, uniform immaculate, jaw like carved granite. His presence alone pulled the air taut. The murmurs died instantly. Passengers craned their necks. He scanned the tableau. The seated couple, the standing CO, the harried attendant, the clogged aisle. His voice was low, but carried the weight of command. "Good morning. I'm Captain Patterson. I understand we have a seating discrepancy preventing us from departure. Report." Brenda handed him the boarding passes with trembling fingers. He read them once, then looked up at the Millers with steady, unblinking eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice even deliberate. "Your tickets are for row 4. This passenger is the rightful occupant of 1A. I need you to move to your assigned seats immediately so we can secure the cabin for departure." The air stilled. A single bead of sweat trickled down Tom Miller's temple. Caroline's lips parted, ready to argue again. The passengers leaned in, waiting. Phones hovered. The opening act of this flight's story had ended, but the turbulence had only just begun. Act I ends on precipice. The captain's order hangs heavy in the charred silence. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The silence after Captain Patterson's words was so sharp it could cut glass. For a fraction of a second, it seemed like order might be restored. Instructions had been given, the authority in the cabin had spoken, and surely reason would prevail. But Caroline Miller had never learned how to bow to reason. Her face flushed a furious pink, jaw tight, lips pursed like a schoolteacher scolding a child. She crossed her arms, diamonds flashing defiantly. "This is outrageous," she hissed. "We've flown this route for 15 years. We always sit in the first row. Always. Why on earth would we accept anything else? Clearly your manifest is wrong." Tom Miller found his bravado again in his wife's indignation. He sat up straighter, puffing out his chest like a rooster. "Captain, with all due respect, we're top-tier preferred members. My company spends millions annually with this airline. Millions. We're not moving. This," he gestured at Serafina with a dismissive flick of his hand, "is some clerical mix-up. She can take row 4. Row 4. The words hung in the air like poison, as though Serafina was a piece of luggage, to be stowed wherever was convenient. A ripple of unease passed through the first-class cabin. The young man in 2C tilted his phone more deliberately now, his thumb hovering to make sure the red recording light stayed on. The businessman in 3A leaned forward, studying Serafina more closely. Recognition sharpened his gaze. He knew who she was now. Captain Patterson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was absolute steel. Mr. Miller, the manifest is not wrong. Your seats are 4B and 4C. You will move there now. This is not negotiable. Caroline let out a shrill laugh, brittle as glass under strain. Not negotiable? Do you have any idea who we are? My husband is Executive Vice President at Vidian Dynamics. Do you understand that? Do you realize what one phone call can do to your career? Brenda, the flight attendant, paled. She knew Vidian Dynamics, a massive corporate account. Tom's threat, exaggerated or not, was dangerous. Her eyes darted to the departure clock above the galley door. Their takeoff window was narrowing. Every second mattered. And then, as if sensing Brenda's hesitation, Caroline struck again. This is why customer service is dead. We pay your salaries, and this woman, she jabbed a finger at Serafina, without even looking at her, is holding up 300 passengers because she can't be reasonable. Seat 4 is still first class. Let her sit there. Serafina had been quiet, watching, her posture calm but unwavering. She knew this pattern. She had seen it in boardrooms, in hospital funding meetings, in places where assumptions outweighed facts. People expected her to fold, to be gracious in the face of insult, to smooth over the discomfort caused by someone else's arrogance. But she had not built a multi-billion-dollar company by folding. She drew a slow, steady breath and did something subtle but devastating. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and dialed. The cabin hushed further, passengers craning. "David," she said softly, her tone calm but pitched to carry. "Yes, I'm on board. There's a slight delay, a seating issue. It'll be resolved." She paused, listening. "But while I have you, can you confirm that the final Helios prospectus was delivered to all 12 acquisition board members at Northgate Ventures, especially Robert Peterson?" The names dropped into the silence like thunderclaps. "Good," she continued. "And make sure the valuation memo is on Peterson's desk. This merger is the linchpin. A $4.2 billion deal doesn't just wait around. If this flight is delayed too long, it could jeopardize signing." Murmurs rippled across the cabin. Passengers leaned toward one another, whispering. The businessman in 3's eyes widened in recognition. Dr. Serafina James, the biotech CEO, the woman whose innovations were being called a revolution in personalized medicine. Tom Miller's smug expression faltered. He understood the language of billion-dollar deals. He was a corporate EVP, yes, but even he knew the sheer magnitude of that number. For $0.2 billion. His company wasn't worth half that. Still, pride is a stubborn parasite. "So what?" he muttered. "She thinks she's important?" But Caroline only heard one thing. Delay. Her outrage boiled over. "For heaven's sake," she snapped at Brenda. "Are you seriously going to let this woman hold up the entire plane with her phone calls? Captain, do something." But Brenda was no longer looking at Caroline. Her eyes were fixed on Serafina with dawning awe. She suddenly understood who she was dealing with. This wasn't some confused passenger. This was a titan of industry, a woman whose every second cost more than Caroline Miller's diamonds. The captain's jaw flexed once. He keyed his radio. "Tower, this is Transatlantic 815. We have a non-compliant passenger situation. Hold our departure sequence. Requesting Port Authority." The words slammed into the cabin like turbulence. Non-compliant. Grounded. Port Authority. A collective groan rose from passengers further back. People began checking their watches, muttering, "I've got a connection at SFO. Unbelievable. We'll miss our slots." The frustration wasn't directed at Serafina anymore. All eyes drilled into the Millers. Phones were everywhere now, tilted discreetly but unmistakably. Serafina slid her phone back into her purse. Calm, collected, absolute dignity. She turned to Brenda, her voice as steady as an oak. "I am not moving. My seat is 1A. Her words landed like a verdict. The Millers were unraveling. Tom tugged at his collar, sweat beading along his hairline. "This is insane," he barked. "You're grounding a plane over seats? Do you have any idea of the legal liability?" Captain Patterson cut him off with the authority of someone who had weathered storms at 35,000 feet. Sir, your refusal to comply is a federal violation. You are not being removed over seats. You are being removed for failure to follow crew instructions. That is a safety risk. And I will not take this aircraft into the air with unsafe passengers aboard. Passengers erupted in quiet applause, clapping softly, murmuring agreement. Caroline's voice hitched, shrill now, trembling between fury and panic. You can't do this to us. We'll ruin you. We'll. But her words were drowned out by the sight of two Port Authority officers boarding at the front, tall and impassive, their presence like a gavel slamming down in court. Sir, ma'am, one said evenly, gather your belongings. You'll need to come with us. The Millers blustered, pleaded, but the inevitability was crashing down on them like pressure at altitude. Their walk of shame was coming. And Serafina, still as a stone, eyes calm, posture regal, watched silently as the scales began to balance. Act 2 closes not with shouting, but with a shift of power. Passengers no longer saw a confused woman. They saw a leader who stood her ground, and a couple about to be crushed by the very weight of consequences they believed they could outrun. The aisle was frozen in tableau, the way a crowd pauses when something inevitable is about to happen. The two Port Authority officers stood shoulder to shoulder, their navy uniforms dark against the cream walls of the first-class cabin. They weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but their presence carried the immovable weight of law. Sir, ma'am. The taller one's voice was low, firm, unyielding. Gather your personal belongings. You'll need to come with us. Tom Miller's face collapsed. The bravado of moments ago leaked out of him like air from a punctured tire. His ruddy cheeks were pale now, slick with sweat. He looked at the officer as though he could argue his way out, but the man's flat stare cut off the words before they formed. This is a misunderstanding. Tom tried anyway, his voice cracking. We were just about to move. Weren't we, Caroline? We'll move to row 4 right now. The officer didn't blink. That option is no longer available, sir. Your luggage, please. The other officer reached up, popping open the overhead bin. Two sleek roller bags slid forward with a heavy thump. The sound echoed like a gavel strike. Passengers craned their necks, eyes following every move. Caroline's composure finally shattered. The flawless blonde hair, the diamonds, the carefully curated image of control. None of it mattered anymore. She broke into loud, gulping sobs that filled the cabin with raw, unvarnished desperation. This is insane. You're treating us like criminals. All I did was sit down. Her words were swallowed by the silence of 300 people watching. Not one sympathetic face among them. Phones tilted. Screens glowed. The young man in 2C zoomed in, framing Caroline's tear-streaked face. His lens slid over to Tom, who looked less like an executive and more like a child caught stealing. The walk from row 1 to the aircraft door was only 10 feet, but for the Millers, it stretched into an eternity. They stood reluctantly, their movements jerky with shame. The portly Tom squeezed into the narrow aisle first, dragging his expensive roller bag. Caroline followed, her sobs punctuated with half-formed protests. We didn't, this isn't, do you know? Her voice faltered under the weight of 300 furious glares. The aisle became a gauntlet. A businessman in 3A lowered his glasses, staring them down with disgust. A woman in 5D muttered under her breath, "Unbelievable!" And somewhere from the back, a sharp voice rose above the whispers. "Get them off already." A ripple of agreement followed. Someone clapped sarcastically. Another voice added, "Good riddance." Caroline stumbled, her sobs ragged, clutching at Tom's arm for balance. But he was too busy staring at the floor, shoulders slumped, the sweat dripping down his temples. They reached the front, and for the first time, Caroline's tear-swollen eyes collided with Serafina's calm, steady gaze. There was no gloating in Serafina's expression, no triumph, just dignity, quiet, unshakable, immovable, the gaze of someone who had been tested and refused to yield. Caroline's lips curled in a final flash of venom, a look not of apology, but of hatred, bitter, impotent hatred of someone who had refused to be diminished. Serafina didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She didn't need to. And then the Millers were gone, escorted down the jet bridge by the officers, their sobs and protests fading into the drone of the engines. The door sealed with a heavy metallic clunk. A collective exhale rippled through the cabin. Passengers muttered relief. A few even applauded softly, their claps awkward but cathartic. Brenda, the flight attendant, sagged against the galley wall, her professional mask barely holding. The purser George exchanged a look with Captain Patterson, a wordless acknowledgment of crisis contained. And Serafina? She simply sat. Seat 1A, the seat she had paid for, the seat she had defended, the seat that had become something larger than upholstery and numbers. She adjusted her blazer, placed her bag neatly by her side, and finally let her shoulders relax against a leather headrest. The captain's voice filled the cabin over the intercom, calm but tinged with steel. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. The non-compliant passengers have been removed. For security reasons, we are required to conduct a full manifest recheck and cabin sweep before departure. This will take some time. Current estimate, 90 minutes. We appreciate your patience. A groan swept through the plane. 90 minutes. Missed meetings, misconnections, rearranged schedules. Every passenger knew who to blame. The whispers weren't subtle. That couple. Ridiculous. Absolute disgrace. But beneath the inconvenience, there was something else. A story had just been born. The young man in 2C was already editing his footage. His fingers flew over his phone, trimming clips, adding captions. Within minutes, the first post went live. Entitled couple tries to steal a black woman's seat in 1A. Refused to move. Get entire plane grounded. Captain calls cops. Absolute legends. Attached was a 2-minute video, seamlessly capturing the arc. Serafina calmly presenting her boarding pass. Caroline sneering, honey, this is first class. Tom barking about millions spent. The captain declaring non-compliant. And finally, the officers leading them out. It was perfect. Compact. Viral bait. The plane hadn't even left the ground when the first likes, shares, and retweets started climbing. By the time Flight 815 finally pushed back on the gate, the video had crossed 250,000 views. By takeoff, 1 million. At cruising altitude, the Wi-Fi flickered to life. Notifications detonated across devices. Passengers gasped, whispering, pointing at their screens. Look, this is us. Oh my God, it's already trending. Hashtag Seat 1A is blowing up. Someone murmured, she's famous. That's Dr. James. She's the CEO of Aura Innovations. The name spread like wildfire through the cabin. Suddenly, passengers weren't just watching a viral video. They were part of a breaking story. Serafina sat quietly, her phone buzzing incessantly in her purse. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. She kept her gaze on the window, watching clouds drift by, the horizon painted in gold and blue. It wasn't pride she felt, nor triumph. It was something deeper, quieter, a clarity. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted or threatened. She had simply refused to be erased. And the world, for once, had noticed. Somewhere below them, in the tangled circuitry of social media, names were being unearthed. Caroline and Tom Miller were identified within the hour. Their company affiliations, their charity boards, their social accounts. Nothing was hidden from the hive mind for long. And in Dallas, the headquarters of Vidian Dynamics was already bracing for impact. For Serafina, the stakes were still personal. A looming meeting in San Francisco, a merger worth billions. But for the Millers, the stakes had just shifted to survival, because the court of public opinion had opened its session, and the verdict was already forming. By the time Flight 815 leveled off at cruising altitude, the incident in Seat 1A was no longer confined to a cabin at 35,000 feet. It was already ricocheting through the digital bloodstream of the internet. The young man in 2C, Ben Carter, hadn't just posted his video. He had threaded it with context. His captions narrated the story like a miniature documentary. Couple tries to steal a black woman's seat in first class. Refused to move even after boarding passes proved them wrong. Captain ground the entire aircraft. Police called. The closing shot. Caroline Miller's tear-streaked face as she was escorted off, juxtaposed with Serafina calmly settling into her rightful seat, was cinematic in its quiet power. The internet devoured it. Within 2 hours, the clip had 10 million views. By the time Serafina's dinner tray was cleared, major outlets had embedded it on their front pages. CNN, BBC, Bloomberg, TechCrunch. Hashtags exploded across platforms. Hashtag Seat1A, hashtag She Belongs Here, hashtag Vidian Values. And then the real blow landed. The names. Digital sleuths dug through travel manifests, cross-referenced with LinkedIn, Instagram, charity galas, and press releases. The couple's identities spread like wildfire. Tom and Caroline Miller, Dallas, Texas. He, Executive Vice President of Sales at Vidian Dynamics, a $3 billion industrial giant. She, Chairwoman of a high-profile children's hospital fundraising gala. The internet didn't hesitate. Screenshots of Tom barking, "Do you know who I am?" sat side by side with his glossy corporate headshot. Caroline sneering, "Honey, this is first class," played on loop beside photos of her sipping champagne at charity events. And over all of it, the contrast, Dr. Serafina James. Calm, elegant, grounded in grace while defending what was rightfully hers. By the time dessert service began, the Millers' world was collapsing. Corporate crisis. At Vidian Dynamics headquarters in Dallas, the phones were ringing off the hook. Clients demanded statements. Reporters crowded the lobby. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the skyline. On one screen, the viral video looped, playing Tom's sneer over and over. On another, the stock ticker dipped steadily as hashtags trended. Hashtag boycott Vidian. The CEO, grim-faced, spoke over the chaos. "This is untenable. We cannot have our executive vice president publicly identified as the man who tried to bully a black woman CEO out of her seat, especially when that woman is Serafina James. She's about to close a merger worth billions. Do you understand the optics? We don't just have a PR crisis. We have a values crisis." The vote was unanimous. By noon, Vidian released a statement. Vidian Dynamics has been made aware of a deeply disturbing incident involving one of our employees, Mr. Thomas Miller. His behavior, as documented in widely circulated footage, is antithetical to our company's values of respect and equality. Mr. Miller's employment has been terminated effective immediately. We extend our apologies to Dr. James and to all those affected. The press release hit the wires before Serafina's flight even began its descent into San Francisco. Tom Miller's career, decades in the making, was over in hours. Social fallout. Caroline fared no better. The hospital board where she chaired the annual gala called an emergency session. Her name was now radioactive. Every donor unwilling to be associated with the woman from Plain. Within 24 hours, she was asked to resign. Her phone filled with messages. "Step aside gracefully. We cannot be linked to the scandal. It's over." Her carefully curated social standing, fundraisers, galas, country club luncheons crumbled. She was disinvited from events before the invitations were even printed. And then came the ultimate humiliation, a letter from Transatlantic Airlines. Effective immediately, Tom and Caroline Miller were placed on the airline's permanent no-fly list. Worse still, the FAA announced a formal investigation into their noncompliance. Federal fines, possible charges, real consequences for what they thought was a harmless act of entitlement. The couple who had once measured their worth in upgrades and status points now couldn't even book a ticket. Meanwhile, in Seat 1A, through all of this, Serafina remained composed. She hadn't sought this. She hadn't raised her voice or demanded revenge, or even addressed the Millers beyond stating the truth. "This is my seat." Yet the world had seen, the world had judged, and the world had answered on her behalf. As the cabin lights dimmed, she finally pulled out her phone. Notifications flooded her screen. Texts from her COO David, emails from journalists, alerts from financial press. Her name was trending globally. She scrolled briefly, her brow furrowing. "Sarah, are you okay?" David's message blinked across her screen. "The whole world has seen the video. You're everywhere. You're being called a symbol of grace under pressure. Vidian just fired him. His company stock is tanking. Serafina exhaled slowly, her eyes turning to the dark sky beyond the window. She hadn't chosen the spotlight, but perhaps the spotlight had chosen her. The captain's apology. Midway through the flight, Captain Patterson left the cockpit. He approached seat 1A, pausing to incline his head respectfully. "Dr. James," he said quietly, "on behalf of the airline, I want to apologize again for what you endured before departure. You showed more composure than anyone had a right to expect. You reminded us what real leadership looks like." Passengers nearby listened, nodding subtly. Even the purser, George, added, "Ma'am, it was an honor to back you up." Serafina gave them both a calm, gracious smile. "Thank you. You did your jobs. That's all anyone can ask." But inside, she recognized something deeper. This wasn't just about a seat or even about her. It was about every silent moment of prejudice she and countless others had endured unrecorded, unacknowledged. This time, the world had borne witness. In the boardrooms, as the plane sailed over the Rockies, her phone buzzed with one more message. It was from Robert Peterson, chairman of Northgate Ventures, the man whose approval would finalize the Helios merger. "We're following the news. Your conduct this morning was a masterclass in leadership. Looking forward to welcoming you in San Francisco." She stared at the message, the corners of her lips curving slightly. A standing ovation in the boardroom wasn't guaranteed, but respect, the kind that money and privilege couldn't buy, was already hers, on the ground. Meanwhile, back in Dallas, the Millers faced their new reality. Cameras swarmed their home. Neighbors whispered behind closed curtains. Reporters shouted questions. "Do you regret your actions? Will you apologize to Dr. James? Are you aware you've been banned from flying?" Caroline slammed the door in their faces. Tom shut the blinds. Their phones rang endlessly. Friends, lawyers, journalists, all demanding explanations. But no explanation could undo what the world had seen. Arrogance colliding with justice. The couple who once looked down their noses at others now found themselves pariahs. Closing beat of Act 4. Back in seat 1A, Serafina closed her eyes, resting her head against a leather cushion. The hum of the engines was steady, soothing. The incident was behind her, but the ripples were only beginning. The Millers' downfall was swift, brutal, and public. Her rise, quiet, earned, unstoppable, was now illuminated for the world to see. The seat they had tried to steal had become a throne, not of power, but of proof. Proof that dignity, when held with unshakable resolve, can become the most powerful weapon of all. The descent into San Francisco cut through a bruised twilight sky, the horizon painted in violet and flame. As Flight 815 shuddered gently through layers of cloud, Dr. Serafina James prepared herself. She had only 90 minutes to land, clear, and reach Northgate Ventures' glass tower in the financial district. The merger signing, the culmination of 2 years of relentless negotiation, waited on her arrival. Yet when she powered her phone back on, her screen erupted in a storm of notifications. Messages stacked endlessly. Texts from David, her COO, calls from reporters, emails from industry leaders she hadn't spoken to in years. Headlines scrolled past like breaking waves. CEO handles in-flight racism with poise, goes viral. Couple removed from flight after attempting to steal black woman's seat. That woman was no ordinary passenger. She's the CEO behind biotech's biggest deal. Her stomach tightened, not with fear but with clarity. She hadn't courted this. She hadn't staged a performance. She had only insisted on sitting in the seat she had paid for. Yet the world had seen something larger. Her phone buzzed again. David's voice came through when she answered, taut with urgency. "Sarah, are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't understand," he said breathlessly. "You're the top story in every outlet. The clip has over 30 million views. Tom Miller's already been fired. Vidian's stock is tanking. People are calling this the perfect parable of privilege meeting consequence." Serafina closed her eyes for a moment. 30 million views. It was staggering, but she steadied herself. "David," she said softly, We have work to do. The merger. Arrival in San Francisco. A sleek black town car met her curbside as it sped through the glittering arteries of downtown. Serafina gazed at the city lights, her reflection in the windows superimposed over bridges and towers. She thought of the Millers at home, doors shut, their reputations incinerated by their own arrogance. And she thought of the meeting ahead, of the boardroom filled with skeptical titans who held the fate of her company in their hands. When the car pulled up to Northgate skyscraper, she was met by a distinguished man in a tailored suit. Dr. James, he said warmly, extending a hand. Jonathan Cole, senior partner. Robert asked me to escort you personally. We're honored you're here. Honored, not apologetic, not sympathetic. Honored. As they walked through marble halls and into a private elevator, Jonathan leaned closer, lowering his voice. Everyone upstairs saw the footage. They were impressed, to put it mildly. Serafina's lips curved faintly, but her reply was steady. Then I hope they're just as impressed by my numbers. The boardroom. The double doors opened to reveal a sun-drenched boardroom perched 60 floors above the bay. 12 of the most powerful people in venture capital sat around a gleaming mahogany table. Conversations hushed as she entered. Then something extraordinary happened. Robert Peterson, the chairman, rose to his feet. One by one, every board member followed, until the entire room was standing in silent respect. It was not choreographed. It was not symbolic. It was reverence. For her calm, her dignity, her proof that leadership isn't defined by power claimed but by power restrained. Dr. James, Peterson said, striding forward to shake her hand. Your composure today was a masterclass. We're privileged to have you here. Serafina met his handshake with confidence. Thank you. But today isn't about me. It's about the future of medicine. Shall we? The presentation. For the next hour, she held the room. She spoke not in jargon but in stories, of a young mother who could know decades in advance about a hereditary heart condition, of doctors in remote villages who could finally screen for diseases with a single drop of blood. She transformed charts into narratives, numbers into lives saved. Skeptics challenged her. A board member asked about entrenched competition. She answered, We're not offering a better thermometer. We're offering foresight. Our competitors measure sickness. We predict it. That's not an improvement. It's a disruption. Another pressed her on global adoption. She smiled. 3 G20 nations have already signed letters of intent contingent on this merger. Adoption isn't a question. It's a timeline. Her voice never wavered. She didn't just argue for aura innovations. She embodied it. The question of the day. Finally, Catherine Lee, a sharp-eyed board member, asked the question everyone expected. Dr. James, your company is dedicated to dismantling systemic barriers in healthcare. After your very public experience this morning, do you have any new perspective on systemic barriers outside of medicine and how leaders are meant to confront them? The room went still. Serafina let the silence stretch, owning it. Then she leaned forward, her voice steady, resonant. What happened this morning wasn't about a seat. It was about an assumption that my presence in that space must be an error. In business, as in science, progress is made by confronting false assumptions with irrefutable data. My company is the data, our patents, our results, our growth. My presence in this room, ready to execute a multi-billion-dollar merger, is also the data. Her gaze swept the room, piercing, unwavering. The barrier I face today is a symptom of an outdated operating system. Slow, prone to crashing. The Helios merger isn't just about expansion. It's about upgrading the system itself, bringing innovation, access, and equity to places long denied it. That is how I lead, by refusing to step aside, by removing obstacles and continuing forward. The silence was electric. Then came applause, sustained, thunderous, unanimous. The decision. Peterson raised a hand, quieting the room. Dr. James, the board doesn't just approve this merger under your terms. We are increasing our capital investment by $50 million. We don't want to be just your partners. We want to fuel your mission. Today, you've shown us that character is the best collateral. Her signature on the documents flowed like a final stroke of inevitability. Years of sacrifice, of doubted spaces and whispered insults, condensed into ink binding a deal worth billions. The Helios merger was sealed. The aftermath. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted her name. But when asked about the incident on the plane, Serafina redirected with surgical precision. This isn't about a seat. It's about making healthcare accessible to every community on this planet. That's what matters. Her restraint only amplified her legend. The public saw not a victim, but a leader, a woman who transformed humiliation into momentum. By nightfall, news anchors spoke of her as if she were a head of state. Late-night hosts called the incident the Karma Flight. Think pieces labeled her a case study in modern leadership. And in Dallas, the Millers sat in the ruins of their social and professional lives, pariahs in their own circles, condemned by their own arrogance. Later, alone in the presidential suite at a hotel overlooking the bay, Serafina stood by the window. Below her, the city glittered like circuitry, alive with energy. She set down the leather portfolio containing the signed merger and reached into her bag. From inside, she pulled her boarding stub. Seat 1A, creased slightly from a morning's chaos. She held it between her fingers, a reminder of a simple truth. She had refused to move. Her reflection in the glass was steady, the platinum watch on her wrist glinting faintly. Outside, the light stretched toward the horizon. A quiet smile curved her lips. Not for revenge, not for vindication, but for every life her company would change, every barrier that would fall. The Millers had tried to put her in her place. Instead, she had redefined where that place was, at the head of the table at the helm of a revolution in seat 1A. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.